thank you all for coming.
No problem. Thank
Our
you.
last panel, tell everyone about what hipster enterprises really want. Okay, so to get started, I think the best thing to do is have you guys all do a quick intro, talk a little bit about your responsibilities, and sort of how your organizations are set up.
Great, I can go ahead and get started. I'm Kimber Lockhart. I lead the technology team at One Medical. For those of you who are not familiar with One Medical, we are the nation's largest independent primary care system. What that means is that we're doctors' offices, and we have about 80 doctors' offices in 8 cities across the US, and our focus is on getting rid of all of the bad parts of going to the doctor and replacing it with a high quality, convenience, high service experience that ultimately helps deliver better care and cut the rising cost of healthcare. Within the technology team at One Medical, we have both our own product development. We have engineers, designers, product managers that are ultimately responsible for building the software that powers the practice and our patients' engagement with our doctors. And then we also have an IT and security group who are in charge of working with fine folks like you to select and deploy solutions that help us to do that all faster.
Perfect.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ralph Gootee. I'm CTO and co-founder of PlanGrid. We write beautiful, easy-to-use software for the $17 trillion construction industry. So a lot of people are familiar with GitHub here, I'm assuming. So construction has a lot of similar problems as software development. It needs version control. If you have version control, that means there's issues happening on these blueprints that are being versioned, and that means you have to collaborate around the issues and do compliance, track documents. So we do all document control and collaboration for the construction industry.
I'm Valentino Volonghi. I'm CTO at AdRoll. AdRoll is a marketing firm, and what we do effectively is that we offer tools for running marketing campaigns, both to B2C companies and to B2B companies. And effectively, we end up being actually both on the buyer side and on the seller side quite a lot because we sell a lot to other companies. So everything that has been said today is particularly interesting. But what the technology that sets us aside effectively is the ability to listen in on all of the traffic that is happening on the web each individual day, and that's over 110, 120 billion potential transactions each individual day, and answering to those within 100 milliseconds wherever they're happening around the world. Collecting all of this information obviously can lead to a lot of problems and scaling issues, and effectively, if we can do it particularly well, for every dollar that our customers are giving us and investing in our product, we can give them back 30 or more dollars, depending on how effective their campaigns and setup is and how effective our product is, of course.
Perfect. So I'd like to have each of you, you've heard us talk today all about like the various enterprise features, reporting, RBAC, SSO, audit logs, et cetera, right? So are there features that are must-haves when you're going to be buying from a vendor that you're like, you really just have to have that? Or maybe it's the 99% you have to have that.
I can start, I guess. Well, there's a few. I would say there's a few things that we probably don't really need. One of them is RBAC, because when we open, it's all the same things that Alex was saying. Effectively, it kind of kills the conversation between different team members. It's fine that people have roles, but it's not really possible to determine who's going to come up with a good insight or something interesting that they have found in the data set or in some reporting or some alarm. You never know when you're going to be about to board the plane and you're the only person that has the ability to access that particular flag or alarm or report, and all the people that are left out that are not boarding the plane with you can't do it for you. So usually we don't care too much about that aspect.
So on that, do you look for a more like coarse-grained, like at least admin and user, like there's some level of roles I'm looking?
Yeah, so very, very coarse, like team level, saying like the engineering team as a whole can access all of these things, and the sales team can only access this particular area because we don't want the sales team making notification to reporting or to alarms, and then things don't just by mistake or of any sort. But
so it's like sales team and everybody else. Like
No,
that's
no,
your-
it's like sales and then support and then solutions engineering. But yeah, sales obviously is the.
So it sounds like you have some roles that you look for, just not maybe super granular. Is that
Yeah,
right? Okay.
that's about. But all of the extra granularity that usually comes that maybe enterprises ask for is a lot of maintenance cost then to keep your product up to date with how the organization is changing. We have people sometimes that transition in different parts of the organization. One thing that happens even with our own product, where we have some roles involved, is that people scheme underneath the surface of processes and conversations to get access to higher powered roles so that they can do more inside our own product from our own employees. And obviously, when that's found out, it's immediately squashed out. But it's really weird that this weird incentive is created. So it usually means that you're not providing the right set of tools
Sure.
to the people that need that functionality. Yeah.
Ralph, what do you think?
I mean, at PlanGrid, we have a centralized IT team that purchases things like Slack, but mostly it's decentralized by the different departments. So I've never evaluated somebody's authorization mechanisms or access control because different products have different needs. I would say for PlanGrid, we build, most governmental buildings. We build a number of universities. We build prisons. We build schools, and we build internationally. So that means FedRAMP, SOC 2, Type 2 come into importance for us, as well as personal identifiable information. So how a vendor deals with that would be a roadblock for us because we have to comply to other higher powers, and we need our vendors to comply as well. So that's the only thing that I think really bubbles up to some universal truth. Otherwise, it's really just the department and the product.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's like I think this is fairly common where someone has very stringent requirements, and those end up passing sort of down the chain where it's, think about processors and sub-processors, and you sort of are continuously chained to those requirements. So, but are there any other features that you would look at and if a vendor came to you, you say well, we can integrate it with it that doesn't have this?
We have some inline integrations that don't need SSO. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So it's hard to summarize it. But I mean, for SSO is very nice to have. I would be surprised that you could roll out a product that's meant to be used over 10 licenses without SSO.
Okay.
But sometimes products are only meant to be used by small teams. We also, I should mention this, we evaluate the business of the vendors we're doing business with. So if you just fundraise your first seed round, you've got 3 engineers, we're going to analyze that and take that into your risk profile.
Cool. Kimber, how about features you must have?
Yeah, from our perspective, our higher powers, if you will, that tie our hands in what vendors we can select, largely fall into 2 categories. We have compliance and regulatory. We're in the healthcare space. Patient data, keeping it safe and secure is one of our most important priorities. Because of that, and in addition to that, we need to be compliant with HIPAA in many of our vendor selections. On the other side, we directly sell to enterprise. So employers will buy One Medical on behalf of their employee population to get them access to timely and also high quality, low cost care. Because of that, those employers have realized that we also build software and we have access to that patient data. And so they vet our software not unlike they would vet the software of a traditional software vendor. Because of that, for some employers, we have a set of pass-throughs that then we must ensure that our vendors adhere to. So when you're thinking about coming in and what's negotiable and what's not, it's really helpful to understand where my requirements are coming from, because I can't change HIPAA and I can't change the pass-through, but there are some other things I can be flexible on for the right solution. The other framework I'll share with you, especially around healthcare data, is that we kind of look at our services in 3 categories. On the far extreme is data that will definitely contain protected health information. So here's some sort of use case or workflow where we know for sure it'll be there. On the other extreme, We have systems that we control what data goes into that system. Therefore, it is almost impossible for that system to have protected health information. Then we have this middle category, which is actually quite extensive, which consists of the services that might possibly have protected health information. We're not putting any in there, but we're opening it up to internal users who might. Doctors need to communicate with each other, they will. So as we think about services for each of those different categories, we have different responsibilities in how we vet both their adherence to HIPAA and also their security.
So, Kimber, it sounds like you might have a bit more of a centralized IT buying process than maybe Ralph does. Would you describe it like that?
It depends. So for things that are in the category of having protected health information, either likely or for sure, a lot of that needs to go through at least some kind of central process. And that's captained by our legal team, but our security team and compliance team play a role in that process. For things that are unlikely to, those can be more distributed decisions. So we have both, but probably a little bit more to the centralized side than what Ralph was describing.
Valentino, how about you? Centralized, decentralized?
We're a little bit of a mix. If it's engineering and if it's software that goes to directly help building the product or that touches data that is relevant to the product, then the process is mainly siloed inside engineering. And usually legal and security help out around like trying to vet what the product does, although we don't send out questionnaires because I don't think the security questionnaire is useful at all, because oftentimes, as was mentioned earlier, it's like it doesn't match the data that is going to be delivered over to the service. And so you're asking me questions about sensitivity of the data, but you're never going to see any sensitive data, for example. This is what I say from when we receive questionnaires from our customers. And since we don't see it very useful when we receive it, we don't think that maybe sending it out is particularly useful.
But there's very specific data that you just won't send to vendors.
Yeah, so all of the data that is coming from our customers' website, our JavaScript tag and tracking happens directly on our customers' websites. And this could range anywhere from really big public companies to One Medical, actually, as our JavaScript tag on their website. Right. And on the other end, there could be even small and maybe not as sensitive parts of the information. That data just simply does not leave AdRoll. It's stored encrypted, it's siloed by customer, it's deleted every 12 months, and effectively limited access even to people within AdRoll. Not everybody can access that data. So it's all kept, especially after GDPR, everything is kept under a lot of scrutiny. Data that can leave the company is a lot less sensitive. It's not that it's revenue information can leave aggregate data of various kinds. We use Datadog, for example, and they see all of our operational metrics. But it's usually not data that is going to put the business at risk at its core if it were to leak or be mistreated. And that's because we can deal with that luxury. Other parts of the business that deal with even less sensitive data than this, because it's more like our customer list, the leads and whatnot. Customer list is obviously sensitive, but the business is not going to go upside down if like a competitor gets that. Why? Because our JavaScript tag shows who's our customers. So if our competitors want to know our customer list, they can just crawl the web and they get it. But yeah, so
how do you decide with those, we talk about the data that's not going to leave. When you think about the tools that you might need to interact with that data, BI, something else, like how do you decide between a build versus buy on those tools?
Oh, that's a great question. It's a complicated process for us. We are a relatively small, or well, not anymore, very small, but let's say small, medium size, under than 70 people engineering team. So we have a bit of capacity to build things that could be considered close to core. If something is not core to our business, there's almost no point in building it. Obviously, we evaluate the price performance of that particular item, but probably we're going to buy. But if something is in a gray area and the vendor is making us pay a lot more than what it would cost us to build it, then the immediate thing that I go to think of is, oh, you want 250 grand a year for this. Okay, that's like an engineer full time. So yeah, I could put an engineer to work on that thing, but I don't need to work on this thing for 7 years. I can work on this for 3 months, build the 2% functionality that I care of, and then move on from it. There's an old saying that said that Microsoft Word is only used for about 2% of its functionality by any user, but collectively they use 100% of it. That's about how I feel about the various different softwares that we buy. Of all the totality of the features that they have, we may need like 5 or 6. And then once those are covered, and they might be so much simpler to build on our own. And so that's where we kind of like, your pricing is kind of out of whack.
I have to tell you though, my opportunity cost is so high in making that decision. If I think about what else the technical team, the engineers could be working on, if
Yes,
it's in the
Kimber, we all
gray
agree.
area, it's so hard to make the choice to build it when
Kimber's
we
right.
could buy it.
Kimber's right? Yes. Yeah,
There's-
Kimber wins. Sorry.
I mean, she certainly has
exactly right.
she certainly has a
Over
very
here.
strong point, and we don't build a lot of stuff internally, but there's the volume that we operate at, where we have 100 billion data points per day. Sometimes during some days we have reached 7 trillion log lines logged each individual day, and need to process all of those. You signed up for a service and their pricing incentive is not lined up with yours.
Sure.
Then at that point, you kind of figure, maybe my opportunity cost
Yeah.
could have evaluated that a little differently.
That's great. So Ralph, Valentino mentioned vendor security questionnaires. I know when
Yeah,
we
yeah.
talked, you mentioned that you do send them.
Yes.
So, but how do you perceive them?
Well, I mean, I think that one centralized spot of our IT system is we do make everyone go through an IT security audit and also a review of compliance and whatever contracts people are sending us. I'll say most vendors send us really bad contracts initially that have like crazy shit written in there. Like they're like expected no one to ever read it. So we do read through the contracts and we do check legal and everything. And I actually really like the way Kimber described all the different, the different stages. We have the similar thing. Like there's certain data that for sure is going to contain sensitive information, and for sure we send out a security questionnaire. Anything inline, we do a security questionnaire on, and then for other products, say, I don't know, like a design product, a design tool, maybe we don't send the security questionnaire for that. So we do make some judgments there depending on our feeling towards the risk of the data. Because of compliance, every piece of data we have has some severity next to it, right? So if any of the vendor touches that piece of critical data, then they must go through a security questionnaire. When we send out the security questionnaire, we tailor it a little bit. I mean, I do admit receiving a bunch of security questionnaires, whereas joking with some of the other panelists back there, I mean, they're asking us about our physical security of our servers, and it's like, whoa, like, go talk to Amazon about that. But we try to send out one tailored for the issue at hand, mostly because of a compliance reason. We actually are expected to send one out, and if we ever didn't send one out, we could audit ourselves and fail compliance ourselves, which then would have a knock-on effect to our customers.
Yeah. So I think that you kind of mentioned in our earlier conversation that it was really about like just kind of covering your ass when it comes to your vendors and making sure that, because I think this might not be a totally loved opinion, but like those vendor security questionnaires, I think people fill out sort of with half truths.
Yeah.
Right. It's I've seen them filled out and filled them out, and you're kind of like, well, like that's true most of the time, right? And I think that's a challenge. But the thing that you pointed out is sort of you're getting this commitment from your vendor that says they do this, and so it checks the box for you, and then you can go back to them if something would happen.
I will say penetration tests, those are nice. I mean, if you have the time and the need and the want to put a vendor through penetration tests, if they haven't done it yet, that almost always brings good results.
Yeah, and that's actually a point I wanted to bring up around penetration tests is my perspective has shifted as I moved from one side of the table to the other. So as someone selling software, it's easy to be very resistant to buyers doing penetration tests or asking you for the results of your pen test or your audit, and I get that. On the other side, though, I can commit that we're not using it as a sort of binary mechanism to qualify or disqualify a vendor.
Yeah.
Our security team genuinely wants to work with vendors to help them improve their security and to understand where things are today. So yes, if you do terribly in our penetration test, then that could be disqualifying and likely will be.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you're in the same territory that most people are, and that's that you're giving your best to security, yet we find a few things, there's a process to work with you to fix any security issues that we find so that we can feel confident about using your software system.
I have to say, I completely agree with that. It feels like the transactions, sorry, the conversations with vendors, or even when we go to sell something, can sometimes tend to be a little bit too transactional. Like, I have to go through this because this is the process that I was told that I need to follow, without necessarily understanding the backdrop of everything that is happening around. Both, if we're even at the table right now, it means we want to work together, and we're trying to establish a trust relationship between us. We don't know how we work, and so we're going to try to establish things like SLA or security questionnaires. Like, this is the way that we like to be escalated to. This is how you're supposed to communicate with us. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it really is about, we're trying to achieve this particular piece of functionality. I don't need you to tell me that you're up 99.9% of the time, actually, because most of the time, as was mentioned earlier, in like 2 or 3 panels ago, like, go ask Amazon. It's like, they don't even give me an SLA. I'm not exactly sure how I can guarantee that too much. But like, what I need to know is that you're going to care when my business is going to be impacted by the fact that whatever you're building is going to be not available. And yet, on the security front, I don't really care that, personally, AdRoll doesn't necessarily care that you are like going through this questionnaire per se. We have some for compliance, but it's relatively short. What we care about is that you do have a person that is there that deals with security. You do know something about security. For certain types of data, we're going to want to sit down with your team and go through your infrastructure, actually. I want to know how you're going to deal with disaster, if there's going to be a disaster, because if we put your servers in front of our customers' websites and you have a spike of latency for 3 hours each day, our customers are going to leave us. And you're going to be stuck with, and we're going to stuck with you instead, because we maybe signed a contract even. So we really, the deal is, let's really get to know each other as 2 businesses and figure out how we do things, what we value, what are our core assumptions that we really care for, and then we can move on from that.
Sounds like a lot of work.
Well, we only do, how many contracts do we sign in the lifetime of a company? It might be like, AdRoll in 12 or so years that we've been alive, maybe assigned 100.
I got to sign more than that, you know. I got to sell some deals. You got to
from buyers. I mean,
I know you're buying, but I got to sell faster than that. You know, that's my point.
I think it's important to realize that when we work with smaller companies, we have an awareness of what that means, a desire to work together, and a desire not to be so overly arduous with our demands that it causes problems for the vendor. We hope that our buyers will extend us the same courtesy.
So on that front, like, I think it's an interesting, just a quick survey. Like, how many applications do you think are running inside of your organizations from both like a kind of line of business and like centralized total like number of apps that are running? I'll let someone take a stab.
North of 300.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think I'm in the low hundreds.
Low hundreds?
Other vendors, all vendors
All
included?
vendors, yeah. Like,
I don't know, maybe, no, not hundreds, but 50-ish,
okay.
60-ish.
I mean, I think the stat from like Netscope or something is that the average enterprise, like these are generally maybe a little bit bigger than you guys are, but would have 1,053 applications running because of shadow IT primarily. People, you know, signing up for random things online. So, what do you guys do to manage that? Like, how do you take control of that? Is there any tooling or anything you do, or what's that process look like?
We can try to control it on the front end. So that gives you a little bit of controls. You go through You start saying, okay, to buy a piece of software, you got to talk to your manager. And then it's like, wait, that didn't work out. We still have shadow IT teams. Then you got to talk to your director, so you get the front-facing controls. And then on the other side, we catch it during financial audits. It's normally financial incentives that help us control those. We catch them during audits. We run through every vendor. What the hell is this? We go track it down, talk to 5 people before we find the root of who purchased this thing and figure out why they purchased it. But it's it's like a lot of physical effort.
And anything for free tools, things that like people just sign up for free?
Not for me.
If the tool is free, people can sign up for it as long as it doesn't deal with our own data.
Yeah.
So we have like our Google Apps account is blocked to third-party applications. There's only a whitelist for apps. So even if they're free, you can't really add them to your Google Apps account. So all of that and the product and all of the rest of the data usually doesn't have a lot of free stuff. Computers are fleet managed, so if we know that we don't want you to install something, we're going to blacklist it. So there's no way you can install it.
So you blacklist on laptops, but you whitelist on like Google's G Suite.
Yeah, I think it's a balance to try to. We have network monitoring inside the office, so if there is anything that is happening on any laptop, it quickly gets isolated.
Interesting.
And it can be removed. But yeah, it's a balance between letting people do their job and be productive with it without adding too much bureaucracy. And there is a risk profile to everything. There is a trade-off. If I'm adding something to 500 people, it needs to be really valuable because I'm diminishing their productivity just by even 1%. It's diminishing them by a bunch. So it needs to be like this is something that must be done from the top down.
And while people are our greatest vulnerability, they're also our first line of defense. So we do spend a lot of time educating our entire employee population about why these choices are important and trying to help them make better choices. Because if we get too block heavy and we just start blocking a bunch of potentially useful free or paid services, people find something else. They'll go around every time. People are smart. They want to get their job done. And so for us, it's a matter of providing a set of tools that are actually really easy to use, that enable people to get their job done, that are sort of the official set, and then helping folks to understand the risk level in interacting with tools that are outside of that set.
So it's interesting. Do you prefer, when you think about adding new applications into your, like things that you're officially using, is it better for those to be kind of sold in top down where they're talking to your team and you help spread it out, or like where they adopt, like there's kind of this broad adoption and then like it kind of needs to get rolled up? Like, do you have a preference in how those come in? Does one make it easier?
So I came from Box. I was an engineering leader at Box before I came to One Medical. And so amusingly right now I have a bit of a cloud content vendor sprawl going on within One Medical. And the reality is, centrally, we would slow people down if we went through a central process for every major class of application, and I don't want to do that. At the same time, we do hit a stage with various types of vendors when we have enough sprawl within the organization that we need to help provide a tool that just works. For those kinds of vendors, it's very helpful for them to support SSO. So that I can make it really easy for people to pick the one that we already chose, as opposed to going off and picking one of the others.
What's like the best way for someone to get into your organization?
Just have a good product. I mean, good product. Normally top down doesn't normally work for us very much. It's almost always came bottom up. I can remember the time that Slack came out and we had HipChat. And I was fine with HipChat, but for some reason our engineers weren't. Yeah. They like revolted against HipChat, and we like had to go with Slack. I'm like, yo, this is all IRC.
Same thing.
But still, I really just got pressured. I didn't mind though. I didn't really care. I want tools like, we're not that big of an engineering, or we're like 150 or so we're around your all size. And I would hate to bog people down with trying to pick everything. I do feel a regret for letting Quip in. I just beat myself up about that every day because I let Quip in and we still use Google Docs, and it's like I never know where to find anything. I try to write a written document, and it's like, is it in Quip? I don't really like Quip. Is it in Docs? Other people don't like Docs. So I don't know. Maybe I should have had more control at that moment.
That's actually really, I hadn't even thought about that, but and we suffered the same problem in a team of 20, right?
Yeah.
Like shutting down like people from using random things like that, and it's the advantage of having knowledge centralized
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not
yeah.
just like the security implications or the sprawl implications. It's like
Yeah.
how do you centralize that information?
Yeah.
So I mean that's another great point for kind of when your document sprawl, everything else. Like where do you find these?
Yeah,
things?
we got document sprawl too.
Yeah.
Do you have document sprawl? Did you figure it out?
I think we used to have in the marketing department. I think for a little period of time, the marketing
Still
department
marketing
had
department.
5 different email providers. Not really sure what they were doing with 5. We were spending more in email providers than in sending the emails.
Oh, like the content email thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, no, yeah, on the other hand, what I do is I have, with all of my engineering teams, every month, I sit down with each team in specific, and they know that they have a deck that they need to present to me
Oh, that's good.
that talks about their service level agreements, their service level indicators and objectives. They talk about their current infrastructure, the bugs, postmortems, production issues, escalations. And they talk about what tools do they use, their budgets, their forecasts. So my teams own their forecast. If they miss it, they're gonna hear an earful from me about all of that, especially if it's like lack of preparation or stuff like that. But generally speaking, that's how those things get under control.
Some importance in reporting there, right? Because understanding that your application is going to get used, and you need to be able to report and kind of create the next higher level view, the executive level report to surface up for someone like you to, the CTOs
Yeah.
to look at and evaluate and know what's going on.
Yeah, one thing that I really do not like is when you start to use an application and what AdRoll does is usually to avoid some of these problems is that if an application is important enough, then we mandate everybody needs to use it within a short period of time. The downside of that is that the application might be useful, everybody in the company might love it, but it might not have any meta reporting about how the application is getting used. And so usually meta reporting is quite complex because, again, this was mentioned earlier by, I think maybe, again, 2 panels ago about Slack, like the PagerDuty CTO, I forgot the name, but how Slack is like refunding users that are not getting used. That is a way to remove the need, potentially, to an extent, to have meta reporting. But there are other applications in which the user is tied to price, which is normally the case. But you can't always control your use. Like if a team is starting, let's say, talk about any logging service out there, the centralized login, like an SIEM or I don't know, I don't want to name any particular company, but yeah. So those like if a team needs to do backup, needs to do debugging of something in production, it might log a fantastic amount of data, and we pay a ton of it. But if this is done without my knowledge, or like the team is doing it because it's kind of more autonomous, and they end up spending or running out of the entire budget, then how? And you don't have reporting for it. How am I going to figure it out? Splunk does have the reporting for their own thingies, but not every product does.
First, I'm just curious too, for companies your size, if you think about open source, right? I'm sure you use a bunch of open source stuff. Do you work with like the commercial open source vendors behind any of those projects? Something any of you guys do?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we've done that.
Cool.
At times, especially if my only other choice is to deploy and maintain it myself.
Yeah.
You normally don't have a choice. Yeah.
We've done bug bounties for languages because the language has the garbage collection issue in their garbage collector. So we gave $1,000 or something to someone to fix it, and or we become members of the industrial panel of the language. In this case, it's Erlang.
Sure.
We're a member of the Erlang industry group or something, I think it's called, just to.
Very prolific group.
Yeah, Erlang is
Yeah.
strange language.
Cool. So the final question is just advice for vendors, and you've all been vendors, and you've kind of made that transition from being like small startups to like now you're an enterprise, and you've sold into companies, and you've seen that, and you've also now are buying software, and so like what's your best piece of advice? High pressure.
Be clear about what you do and what you don't do. We've been working with a vendor here recently who, throughout most of the sales process, alluded that they would have the compliance standards that we need. And we later found out that only certain use cases were supported around these compliance standards, to the point that it's not useful, we can't use the product. And that's put a bit of a bad taste in our mouth in terms of being able to work with this vendor in the future, even as they do mature their compliance capabilities. It's a lot of our time to buy, as well as a lot of your time to sell. And if we're not upfront about what the product actually does, that can be a big problem.
I'm thinking through all of the recent negotiations I've been through. I'll think of a success and a failure. From the successful side, we did have one vendor, similar to your point, who just said, like, I will not change my contractual language. And we're like, are you sure about that? You really don't want to change? And we pushed them off, we made them wait, and they really just were not going to change the contractual language. And that's fine. You know, we still ended up going with them because the product fell into a certain risk profile and the contractual language was just stupid enough that we felt like we could get by with it. But it was helpful that they were just upfront from the beginning. They weren't trying to drag us on. It was actually us that drug it on a little bit while we just wanted to see if they would change it eventually. And then the other thing I would mention, I've seen, this is more on the failure side, I've seen it's really challenging when I'm assuming most of the people here are selling to people like us, to technology people. We sell to construction, so this advice wouldn't apply there. But I've had a challenge, you know, early stage companies that hire their first salespeople, and it's so hard when you hire like a carrying a bag around to work with a quota salesperson. Even if you didn't give them a quota, their first interaction, if they're selling to other engineers, I mean, I can't believe I've seen this situation, but I've seen, even if it's a technical solutions person, they're like trying to sell to our frontline engineering team. And they're doing okay, the product's good, the foundation of the company is good, but this frontline salesperson, this engineer are like, they kind of hate each other. I mean, yeah, so like just be very cautious with the first salespeople you hire, very cautious with the profile. And there's a lot of great salespeople out there that can have $1 million quotas at some company and failures. I would say in general, the founders have always been the best salespeople I've ever met. So even if you have a sales team, if you're a founder out there selling it, good for you. That's how you're going to learn. If you have a sales team, check in on the customers.
I mean, both of these are great points. I guess I would reconnect to your question you asked earlier about what's the best way to enter in a company. A lot of our clients want to target CTOs or like C-level executives and whatnot. Not only that is not always the best way to go, practically speaking, as was answered already, but if you really are determined to go down that path, make sure that you know exactly which kind of person you're talking to at that point in time, because even if you're just talking to CTOs like us, some CTOs are a lot more technical than others. Some are more big thinkers. Some are more customer-facing CTOs. There's a lot of different varieties of CTOs, and when you get in the room and you have a single deck and the person in front is not as senior or capable of interfacing with another CTO, but it's just like maybe a brand new salesperson that just started at the company and doesn't know the product very well, it's gonna be a train wreck. There's no other way to put it. It's like the first 3 questions I ask, they're gonna be met with, I don't really know. And it's like, okay, well, we have another 45 minutes.
This is gonna be awkward.
Also, I get like 40 vendor emails a day. Don't waste your time on me. Find somebody who's actually making the decision. I'm there to help make sure my teams are making the right decisions. I'm not there to force vendors or products down their throat.
100%.
You're all incredible CTOs.